Part 1. The day it happened, I never thought I'd be writing this on a half-broken tablet in the ruins of what used to be downtown. But here I am, huddled in the basement of a collapsed skyscraper, praying that the creatures don't find me. I need to warn you all about what's really out there, about what's coming for us. It started like any other Tuesday. I woke up late, cursed at my alarm, and rushed through my morning routine. Burnt toast in one hand, travel mug of coffee in the other. I sprinted to catch my bus to work. God, what I wouldn't give for that to be my biggest problem now. I was halfway through my commute when the first signs of trouble hit. The bus driver's radio crackled to life with an emergency broadcast. At first, I thought it was just another test. We'd had so many drills lately with all the international tensions. But then I saw the driver's face go pale. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Nuclear strike imminent. All citizens report to your designated shelters immediately. For a moment, everything went silent. Then chaos erupted. People started screaming, crying, trying to call loved ones on phones that were already dead. The bus screeched to a halt, and the driver yelled at us, all to get out, to run. I don't remember much of what happened next. It's all a blur of panic and adrenaline. Somehow, I found myself running with a crowd towards the community bunker. We'd all joked about it before, the eyesore of a building that the government had insisted on constructing in our neighborhood. No one was laughing now. The sirens started just as I reached the bunker entrance, a deafening wailing sound that made my bones shake. I glanced over my shoulder and saw, God, I still can't believe what I saw. A mushroom cloud rising in the distance. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like a sunset made of death. Strong hands grabbed me, pulled me inside the bunker. The massive steel door slammed shut behind us with a finality that made my stomach drop. That sound, it was like a coffin lid closing. If only I'd known then how right that feeling was. Because while we thought we were safe from the horrors outside, something far worse was waiting for us in the depths of that bunker. Something that makes nuclear annihilation look like a mercy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about those first few days underground, when we still had hope, when we still thought we were the lucky ones. Part 2. Life underground begins. The first few hours in the bunker were a blur of noise and confusion. People were crying, shouting, trying to find family members or friends. The bunker staff, all wearing crisp uniforms with an emblem I didn't recognize, worked to organize us, assigning sleeping quarters and handing out ration packs. I ended up in a small room with 3 strangers, an elderly man named Frank, a teenage girl called Zoe, and a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Dr. Amelia Hayes. We were told to stay in our assigned spaces unless called for, to conserve resources and maintain order. As the initial shock wore off, a strange sort of calm settled over us. We were alive. We had survived. There was even a sense of camaraderie forming among the survivors. People shared stories, comforted each other, and tried to make the best of our situation. The bunker itself was impressive, I'll give them that. Multiple levels of living quarters, hydroponic gardens, water recycling systems, even a small medical bay. It was designed to keep us alive for years, if necessary. But something about it felt off. Maybe it was the way the staff avoided eye contact when we asked questions, or the fact that certain areas were strictly off-limits, guarded by armed personnel. At the time, I chalked it up to necessary security measures. God, I wish I'd trusted my instincts. On the 3rd day, I noticed the first truly strange thing. I was in the common area, trying to distract myself with a book, when I overheard 2 staff members talking in hushed tones. Faster than expected, Section C is already showing signs. Shh, not here. We'll discuss it at the meeting tonight." They clammed up as soon as they noticed me, hurrying away with forced smiles. It left me feeling uneasy, but I tried to push it out of my mind. We had enough to worry about without inventing new problems, right? That night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't quite place, a sort of skittering, scraping noise coming from the walls. When I mentioned it to my roommates in the morning, Frank said he'd heard it too. Dr. Hayes suggested it was probably just the ventilation system, but she wouldn't quite meet my eyes as she said it. It was around this time that people started acting different. Small changes at first, a usually cheerful guy becoming irritable and snappish, a woman who suddenly couldn't stand to be touched, even by her own children. I saw dark circles forming under eyes, heard whispers of nightmares that felt too real. And always, there was that feeling of wrongness, like an itch at the back of my skull that I couldn't scratch. A sense that there was more to this bunker than we were being told. I should have listened to that feeling, should have asked more questions, pushed harder for answers, because by the time I discovered the truth, it was already too late. The real horrors hadn't come from the nuclear bombs. They were growing right here, in the dark with us, waiting to be unleashed. Part 3. Strange occurrences. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the bunker grew increasingly tense. The initial relief of survival had given way to a creeping dread that none of us could quite explain. It was as if the very air around us had become thick with unspoken fears. The noises I'd heard that first night didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. What started as faint scratching in the walls evolved into muffled thumps and, sometimes, what sounded disturbingly like distant screams. When I brought it up to one of the staff members, a young guy named Alex, he paled visibly. "It's just the settling of the structure," he said, his voice shaky. "Nothing to worry about." But his eyes told a different story. They darted nervously to the lower levels, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like fresh scratch marks on his forearm before he hurriedly pulled down his sleeve. It wasn't just the noises, though. People were changing. And I don't mean in the way you'd expect from the stress of our situation. This was something else entirely. I first noticed it with Zoe, my teenage roommate. She'd always been quiet. But one morning I woke to find her standing in the corner of our room, facing the wall. She was muttering something under her breath, over and over. When I approached her, she turned to me with eyes that seemed just a little too wide, a little too bright. "They're coming up," she whispered. "Can't you feel them? They're so hungry." Before I could respond, she snapped out of it, claiming she had no memory of the incident. But I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew something wasn't right. Similar stories started circulating throughout the bunker. People reporting lost time, unexplained injuries, vivid nightmares that left them screaming in their sleep. The medical bay was constantly busy, but no one who went in ever seemed to come out feeling better. Then there was the incident in the mess hall. I was having my usual bland breakfast when a man at the next table suddenly stood up, rigid as a board. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he started speaking in a language I'd never heard before. It sounded ancient, guttural, wrong somehow. Before anyone could react, he collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. The staff rushed in, surrounding him quickly. Too quickly, I realized later. As they carried him out, I caught a glimpse of his arm. It was changing. The skin seemed to be shifting, hardening into something that wasn't quite human anymore. That was when I knew I had to find out what was really going on. The bunker wasn't just a shelter from the nuclear apocalypse. It was hiding something much, much worse. I started exploring the restricted areas at night, using an access card I'd managed to swipe from a distracted guard. What I found in the lower levels of the bunker chilled me to my core. Labs filled with strange equipment, holding cells with reinforced doors, and specimens. God, the specimens. But it was the document I found in one of the offices that truly revealed the horror of our situation. As I read it, my hands shaking, I realized that the nuclear war hadn't been the end. It was just the beginning. Part 4. The Discovery. My heart pounded in my chest as I read through the document, my eyes widening with each terrifying revelation. The papers marked Project Erebus Top Secret detailed something far beyond my worst nightmares. The bunker wasn't built to save us from nuclear war. It was a testing ground, a controlled environment for something much more sinister. The government, or whatever shadow organization was behind this, had been experimenting with a biological agent, something that could alter human DNA, creating, I don't even know what to call them, weapons, new species, monsters. According to the documents, they needed a controlled population to test it on. The nuclear threat had been orchestrated, a smokescreen to gather test subjects without raising suspicion. We weren't survivors. We were lab rats. My hands shook as I read about the different stages of mutation. It explained everything. The strange noises, the behavioral changes, the physical transformations. We were all infected, and the changes were accelerating faster than they'd anticipated. I was so engrossed in the horrifying details that I almost missed the sound of footsteps approaching. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to replace the documents and hide. I squeezed into a supply closet just as the office door opened. Through a crack in the door, I saw Dr. Hayes enter, my own roommate. But she wasn't alone. She was speaking to a man in a military uniform I had never seen before. "The subjects are progressing faster than we expected," she said, her voice clinical and detached, "especially in the lower levels. We may need to initiate containment protocols sooner than planned." The military man nodded grimly. "And the control group?" "Still unaware, for now. But they're starting to ask questions. That one, Eli, the one who overheard Johnson and Crenshaw talking, he's been poking around. We may need to move him to the advanced testing area." I felt my blood run cold. They were talking about me. "Do it," the military man said. "We can't risk the truth getting out. Not when we're so close to creating the perfect soldier." As they continued talking, I struggled to control my breathing. My mind raced with the implications of what I'd learned. The mutations, the experiments, the lies. It was all too much. I don't know how long I stayed in that closet, but by the time I dared to emerge, the office was empty. I made my way back to my room in a daze, my mind reeling from the truth. As I entered our shared space, I saw Zoe huddled in the corner again, rocking back and forth. Frank was asleep, but his skin looked wrong, almost scaly in the dim light, and Dr. Hayes's bed was empty. I knew then that I had to act fast. I had to find a way to warn the others, to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. But as I heard distant, inhuman shrieks echoing from the lower levels, I feared it might already be. The nuclear war outside suddenly seemed like a paradise compared to the horrors brewing within our supposed shelter. And I was trapped right in the middle of it all. Part 5. The horror reveals itself. I spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety, trying to act normal while secretly observing everything around me with new eyes. Every interaction, every announcement from the staff, every meal we were served, it all took on a sinister new meaning. I wanted to warn the others, but who could I trust? The mutations were progressing, and I had no way of knowing who was still human. Even my own roommates were suspect. Zoe's episodes were becoming more frequent, Frank's skin continued to change, and Dr. Hayes, well, I couldn't look at her without remembering her cold voice in that office. It was on the 5th night after my discovery that everything went to hell. I was jolted awake by an alarm I'd never heard before, a pulsing, low-frequency sound that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Red emergency lights flooded the corridors as panicked voices and running footsteps echoed from all directions. Containment breach in Sector C. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures. Heart racing, I jumped out of bed. Frank and Zoe were already up, looking disoriented and scared. Dr. Hayes was nowhere to be seen. "What's happening?" Zoe cried, her eyes wide with fear. Before I could answer, an inhuman shriek pierced the air, closer than I'd ever heard before. It was followed by the sound of rending metal and shattering glass. "We need to get out of here," I said, grabbing Zoe's hand. "Now!" We ran into the corridor, joining a stream of terrified people. The crowd surged towards the upper levels, away from the sounds of destruction below. But as we rounded a corner, we came face to face with a nightmare made flesh. It had once been human. That much was clear. But now, God, how do I even describe it? Its limbs were elongated, joints bending in impossible ways. Its skin was a patchwork of scales, fur, and something that looked disturbingly like tree bark. But its face was the worst. Multiple eyes blinked independently across a misshapen skull, and its jaw had split into mandibles that clicked and chittered. The creature, I couldn't think of it as a person anymore, stood in the middle of the corridor, surrounded by the mangled bodies of those who hadn't run fast enough. As we watched in horror, it turned those unnatural eyes towards us and let out a bone-chilling screech. Panic erupted. People pushed and shoved, trying to get away. Into the chaos, I lost sight of Frank. Zoe's hand slipped from mine as the crowd swept us in opposite directions. "Zoe!" I yelled, trying to fight my way back to her. But it was useless. The last I saw of her, she was being pulled into a side corridor by 2 staff members in hazmat suits. I was carried along with the crowd, away from the monster, but towards who knew what other horrors. Alarms blared, voices shouted orders over the speakers, and always, there were those inhuman shrieks getting closer. As I ran, dodging fallen debris, and trying not to look too closely at the things that moved in the shadows, one thought kept repeating in my mind. I had to get out. I had to warn the world about what was happening here. Because if these things escaped the bunker, God help us all. But first, I had to survive the night, and as I heard more bestial roars echoing through the bunker, I realized that was going to be a lot harder than I'd thought. Part 6. Desperate Escape Attempt. The next few hours were a blur of terror and adrenaline. I found myself moving with a group of survivors, all of us wild-eyed and panting, trying to navigate the maze-like corridors of the bunker. The emergency lights cast everything in a hellish red glow, making it hard to distinguish friend from foe. As we moved, I tried to warn the others about what I'd discovered, the experiments, the deliberate infection, all of it. Some listened with growing horror, while others dismissed me as panicked and delusional. But as we encountered more of those things, even the skeptics started to realize something was deeply wrong. We weren't just running from monsters. Some of the people with us were changing before our eyes. A man who had been helping a wounded woman suddenly stopped, his body convulsing. We watched in horror as his skin bubbled and shifted, bones cracking as they rearranged. His screams of agony turned into inhuman howls as he transformed into something else. It was then that I realized the terrible truth. The mutations were accelerating. Whatever had been keeping them in check, drugs in our food maybe, or something in the air filtration system, was gone now. We were all infected, and it was only a matter of time before we all changed. "We need to get to the surface," I shouted over the cacophony of alarms and screams. "It's our only chance." A small group rallied around me. A security guard named Marcus, who still had his sidearm, a trembling scientist called Dr. Patel, who claimed to know a way to the emergency exit, and a few others, whose names I never learned. Together, we fought our way through the chaos, heading for the upper levels. The journey was a nightmare. We had to navigate around collapsed sections of the bunker, fight off both security forces trying to contain us and the mutated creatures that lurked in every shadow. I saw things that will haunt me forever. People melting and reforming into twisted abominations. Creatures that defied the laws of nature. Staff members coldly executing anyone showing signs of mutation. At one point, we were cornered by a group of the monsters. As Marcus's gun clicked empty and the creatures closed in, I thought it was the end. But then Dr. Patel did something I'll never forget. His body started to change, but instead of fighting it, he embraced it. In seconds, he had transformed into something just as monstrous as our attackers. He turned to us, and for a moment, I saw recognition in his inhuman eyes. Then he threw himself at the other creatures, buying us time to escape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the main blast door. The exit to the surface was just beyond it. But as the massive steel door slowly ground open, we faced a terrible choice. Outside, the world was a wasteland. The sky was dark with nuclear winter, the ground barren and lifeless. Radioactive winds whipped across a landscape straight out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Certain death awaited us there. But behind us, the inhuman shrieks were getting closer. The horrors we'd created in our underground lab were coming, hungry for new victims to infect and transform. As my small group of survivors looked at each other, the question hung unspoken between us. Which was the lesser evil? The nuclear wasteland or the biological nightmare we'd unleashed? In that moment, I made my choice. I stepped towards the open door, towards the ruined world beyond. Because out there, at least, we had a chance. A chance to warn others, to find a cure, to stop this before it spread further. As I write this now, huddled in the ruins and praying the creatures haven't followed us, I don't know if we made the right choice, but I do know this. What we experienced in that bunker was just the beginning. Those things are still down there, evolving, mutating, and sooner or later they'll find a way out. So consider this my warning to the world. The nuclear war wasn't the end. It was just the prelude to something far, far worse. And it's coming for us all. If anyone is still out there, still human, God help us, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Part 7. The Aftermath. It's been 3 days since we escaped the bunker. 3 days of hell on earth, but somehow still preferable to the nightmare we left behind. There are 5 of us left now. Marcus, the security guard, his face grim and his gun always at the ready. Sarah, a former teacher who hasn't spoken a word since we emerged. The twins, Alex and Jamie, barely out of their teens and clinging to each other like lifelines. And me, the one cursed with the knowledge of how this all began. We've taken shelter in the hollowed-out shell of what used to be a shopping mall. The radiation levels here are lower, according to the Geiger counter Marcus salvaged. But that's cold comfort when every shadow makes us jump. Every unexpected sound sends us scrambling for cover. Because we're not alone out here. Yesterday, As we were scavenging for supplies, we saw something moving in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another survivor. But as it got closer, God, the way it moved. No human could bend like that, could cover ground so fast on too many limbs. One of them had found its way to the surface. We ran, of course. What else could we do? But as we huddled in our makeshift shelter that night, listening to inhuman shrieks echoing across the wasteland, a terrible realization dawned on me. We didn't escape. We just changed the battlefield. I've been noticing things, you see. Little changes in my companions. Sarah's silence isn't just shock. Her jaw seems to be fusing shut. The twins' eyes have started to glow faintly in the dark. And Marcus, the scales on his arm are spreading, no matter how he tries to hide them. It's happening to me too. I can feel it. My bones ache with imminent change, my senses sharpening beyond what should be possible. The hunger that gnaws at me isn't just for food anymore. We're changing out here, but slowly. The radiation, the environment, it's altering the course of our mutation. We're becoming something different from the monsters in the bunker, but no less monstrous. Part of me wonders if this was the plan all along. Release us into the wild, see how we adapt, create a new species to inherit this ruined world. I'm writing this as a warning, but also as a confession, because I don't know how much longer I'll be me, how much longer any of us will be human. If you were reading this, if there's anyone left out there untouched by this madness, here's what you need to know. The bunker wasn't unique. There are others out there. I'm sure of it. More experiments, more horrors, waiting to be unleashed. The mutations are spreading. It's not just those directly exposed in the bunkers. It's in the air, the water, the very ground beneath our feet. We're not fighting to save humanity anymore. That war is already lost. We're fighting for what humanity will become. I don't know what the future holds. Will we devolve into mindless beasts, driven only by hunger and instinct? Or will we evolve into something new, something that can survive in this world we've destroyed? All I know is that change is coming. Humanity as we knew it is ending. And God help me. But a part of me is starting to welcome it. This is my final warning, my final message as a human being. Whatever you do, wherever you are, be prepared. The world isn't what you think it is. The war, the bombs, they were just the beginning. The real apocalypse, it's us. And we're coming. Part 8. Metamorphosis. I don't know how long it's been since my last entry. Time has become fluid. The days blend together in a haze of pain and transformation. The changes are accelerating now. I can feel my body reshaping itself, my mind expanding in ways I can't begin to describe. The others, I can't call them human anymore, have undergone similar transformations. Sarah's silence has given way to a haunting song that echoes across the wasteland, calling to others like us. The twins have fused into a single entity, twice as strong and infinitely more strange. Marcus is gone. He chose to end things on his own terms, before the change took him completely. I envy his courage. As for me, I've become something I don't have words for. My skin has hardened into an iridescent carapace. My fingers elongated into razor-sharp claws. I can sense the radiation around us, feed on it even. The hunger that gnawed at me before has transformed into a deep, primal urge to evolve. We're not alone out here anymore. Others have emerged from hiding, survivors from other bunkers, I think. Some are like us, caught between human and something else. Others have embraced the change completely, becoming creatures of nightmare and wonder. And yet, Through it all, I cling to some shred of my humanity. Enough to write this, to try and make sense of what's happening to us. To warn you, if there's anyone left to warn. We've started to organize, to create a new society among the ruins. It's not human, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something. We're learning to use our new abilities, to reshape this broken world in our image. But there's something else out there, something that hunts us. We've seen glimpses of it, sleek, metallic forms that move with inhuman precision. I think they might be what the military was trying to create back in the bunker, the perfect soldiers they spoke of. They're hunting us down, systematically, cleaning up the evidence of their failed experiments, perhaps. Or maybe they see us as a threat to whatever plan they had for this post-apocalyptic world. If you're reading this, if you're still human, I have one last piece of advice. Run, hide, or if you can, join us. Because the world doesn't belong to humanity anymore. It belongs to what comes after, to us. And despite everything, despite the pain, the horror, the loss, I think we might just be the best hope this ruined planet has. This is my final message, not as a human, but as something new. Something that bridges the gap between what was and what will be. The apocalypse has come and gone. The metamorphosis is here, and we are its children.